Okay, let's go ahead and get started if we could, please. Remind you, this afternoon we're going to visit an active timber harvest, so you have to have a hard hat and you have to have boots. Okay. We'll depart from the normal location. The weather forecast is maybe not quite as ideal as we've had on some of our previous labs, but I think we'll survive it. You all have met Steve Childs. He took us around in the woods last week during lab as we were tapping trees, and today he's going to be lecturing on sap collection methods, more generally building a framework for why there's sap that we can collect in the trees, but then talking about sap collection techniques. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
All right.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Pete. Good morning. Everybody's wide awake, right? Sap collection, very important part of the sap syrup making process. One of the first things we run into when we're going to look at gathering sap is, what can I gather sap from? And so some basics in tree identification come in as fairly valuable there. And this is the classic maple leaf. Sugar maple is the one that we really focus most of our attention on, but it has 5 lobes on the leaf, and sometimes it's hard to identify exactly what those lobes are, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the edges of this leaf are fairly smooth. Even though there's curves and cuts in that leaf, it's a very smooth edge leaf compared to some others. The only other leaf that looks exactly like this on occasion is the Norway maple. And usually you wouldn't confuse that just because the other parts of the tree are so different. But you can make maple syrup with anything that's a maple. So we have sugar maple and black maple are the preferred species. Some people do make syrup on a consistent way with red maple. Red maple is not the red leafed maples. Those are Norway's. The red maple is actually a green leafed maple. Right in the woods with the sugar maples. It tends to have red fall colors, whereas sugar maples tend to have orange and yellow fall colors. So it's a green leaf maple. And then silver maple, Norway maple are 2 that we quite often find that people use around villages or near cities. And we don't typically find those in the woods, even though they are sort of reaching out in some places. And then stripe maple is more of a weed, so you might as well tap it if you got one, because there's no other practical use for this tree. And then one that's kind of confusing to people is box elder. It doesn't look like a maple. It has a leaf that would make you think it might be an ash, actually, rather than a maple. And yet, in a setting where you have a good canopy, I've seen box elder trees with 4% sugar content in their sap, which is pretty acceptable. Any of the syrup that's made from these different trees, no one that I'm aware of could distinguish this one syrup from another. They are all essentially the same maple syrup. Sugar maple is the one that we saw mostly when we were at the Arnott, even though there were some soft maple or red maples mixed in. And it kind of has the classic long lines up and down with the bark, even though that can change from site to site in different places. But the easiest way to probably tell a sugar maple is that it has opposite buds, and those buds are very sharp, very pointed. And that's the easiest identifier. However, when you're in the woods, a lot of times the lowest branch is how high? Out of sight, as far as trying to make sure you have exactly what bud you're trying to find there. And there's our leaf again, that is smooth edge. Now the main one we would compare that to would be the soft maple. Now why do we use sugars and blacks? They have the sweetest sap under any given conditions. In other words, when they're crowded, they tend to run about 2% sap. Those other species, if they were crowded, would be somewhere around 1 to 1.5 under those same conditions. They have a very late bud break. They're dormant long into the spring compared to some of the other maples. Soft maples, in particular the red maples, they bud fairly early. And once a tree starts to bud, it puts this extra amino acid into that sap, and you concentrate what we call buddy flavor. And most people are not very attracted to buddy flavored maple syrup. It goes from a maple flavor to a Tootsie Roll kind of flavor, and then it gets much worse from there. The They're very common in New York. They're a very long-lived tree. And if you're making maple syrup, this is the type of tree that we really are kind of looking for. Huge canopy, very low ratio of log to branches kind of thing. That's where we get our best sugar contents. And this is what you'd find if you were in the woods looking at a soft maple. They have the very round buds. They tend to be very red. And if you put the buds side by side, there's just no mistaking which is which. Both sugars and soft maples have very smooth bark when they're little. And then the soft maple actually forms these targets of roughness when they start to get a little older, so that's an easy way to identify them. Sugar maples, on the other hand, just gradually develop that roughness. It doesn't target out like that. And then the leaves are very distinguishable. Same shape, same 5 lobes, but these have a sawtooth edge. Just like a handsaw, the teeth on a handsaw, it runs right up those edges of those leaves. And that's the easy way to identify, except if you have leaves, you're probably not making maple syrup. So one of the secrets in maple syrup is to identify your trees prior to the day you go out to tap. If you're just bark IDing in the woods on a rainy day like today, it's very difficult to ID trees. I've been known to walk up to aspens, red oaks, basswoods, soft maples, and stand there for a minute and say, is this a maple tree or is this not? On a sunny day, it's much easier. You get the coloration helping you out. Rainy days, people can tap almost anything and realize later they've made kind of a serious mistake. So these other trees would typically have 2 problems. They swell buds early, and they have the lower sugar content. Now, one of the questions you come up against is, why does sap happen anyway? There's only a few species that actually run sap. Birch is one, and it has a totally different mechanism than maple does. Maple will run sap. Some of the ironwoods will run a little bit of sap. Basswood will run a little bit of sap. And there's a whole bunch of trees. You can drill holes in them all you want, and you'll get nothing. Absolutely not one drop of liquid coming out of those trees. So it's kind of interesting to look at some of the mechanism as to why this, whoops, Pete, what did I do? I hit spacebar. Did I ruin my picture or my game? All right. So here's my tree. I've got to put that down because I keep wanting to do that. Standing in the woods, and inside that tree, during a warm weather spell, during periods of temperature where it rises above freezing, that warm temperature causes a positive pressure inside the tree. And that positive pressure is what pushes the sap out. It actually comes out under a certain amount of pressure. And it'll push sap out of any hole that's in that tree. So if there's a broken branch, a limb that's off, or your tap hole. So in this case, you can see what I have is here is a spout in a tree, in a tap hole, with a little bit of plumbing, and there I have a pressure gauge hooked to it. And I take a closer look at that. What do you see reading on that pressure gauge? 25 psi. That's a significant pressure. That would blow up a tire on a car to the point where you could drive it. But that's the kind of positive pressure we see on a great sap running day. On the other hand, if I go out and take a picture of my gauge, now I've gone to a gauge that has both a negative reading and a positive reading on it. If I go out and take a pressure reading when it's still below freezing in the morning, because I have to take a flashlight and take a picture if I'm going to do it in the night, but what do you see on this gauge? It's drawing about 6 inches of vacuum. The tree itself is drawing a vacuum because it's below freezing. Now there's a bunch of theories about why the tree does that. One of them is the carbon dioxide in the tree is expanding and coming out of solution on a warm period, and then that kind of carbon dioxide contracts and goes into solution when it drops below freezing. There's some theories about how ice up in the branches has some effect on it, how sugar has some effect on it. But once that tree draws a vacuum and fills itself with sap when it's drawing that vacuum. And then it gradually releases that back when the pressure becomes positive. So once it's cold, below 32 degrees, that tree would show that negative pressure, or actually a suction, and during that suction period would refill itself with that excess water ready to begin when it thaws. Now one of the implications of this, and we've done a fair amount of research, is when that tree is drawing a vacuum, it doesn't just suck water through the roots, it sucks it from a very important place, and that's our tubing or our spouts. And that's how we get our tap holes contaminated in many cases, because it grew that backwards. So the sap is replenished and allows it to run for another period. And then when it turns warm, we get that positive pressure again, and out through our tap hole we get the flow of liquid sap. That was always a mystery to me. I worked in the maple woods for many years and was just totally dumbfounded by the fact that a freeze would make a tree run sap for another 30 hours or so. So why does it stop running if we don't get a freeze? It's really a fairly simple concept, and these pictures are very severe oversimplification of what's actually happening in the tree, but the concept is what I want you to get. Once that tree is filled with sap, part of that pressure comes from just the fact that you have kind of unattached water up in that tree, and that has gravity's pulling down on that water. It'll show a real high pressure right off. And then after that sap flows for a while, that pressure of the gravity relieves some of that water that's above us. So after a while, we start to slow down, our pressure starts to fall. Once I get to my tap hole, then I'm no longer able to extract sap from that tree. I like to say this is an oversimplification because it's just a whole network of tubes, miniature tubes up through that tree. Some of them are empty, some of them are not, and they're gradually working their way down. So, for instance, if you have a good freeze and then it warms up, you'll get good pressure, good flow, and that'll go on for about 20 hours, and then you'll notice the pressure starts to drop, sap flow rate starts to drop, it'll flow for another day, and then you're just getting this little bit until there's absolutely nothing more coming at all. So, where are we getting the sugar? In maple trees, the sugar is actually stored throughout the tree. It's in the roots, it's in the trunk, it's in the branches. So when sap comes in contact with those different parts of the tree, then that picks up some of that sugar that has been converted from the starch that's stored in the tree. What instigates starch converting to sugar is actually cold spells. When you get a cold spike, it'll instigate more sugar being converted. If you don't get a cold spike, your sugar content gradually drops. Late in the season, sometimes we see really low sugar contents because we haven't had a cold shock in a while. Although the other thing that's interesting is a lot of times we as humans are looking at this part of the tree. That's where we can touch it, that's where we can see it, and we're thinking this is where it's important, whether it freezes or whether it doesn't. And actually that's probably the most irrelevant part of the tree to sap flow. What is relevant is what happens in the branches. If they're not freezing, you don't get a sap flow. If they do freeze, then you will, because that's what draws that vacuum. And if they freeze too fast, a lot of times it overrides the mechanism. It freezes so fast that it doesn't have time to draw that vacuum, and it's just blocked by ice. So there's a lot of implications. One of the implications of this is barometric pressure has some influence on sap flow. Temperature and wind. If you get a good transpiration pull on the top of a tree because it's sunny and windy and warm, a lot of times your flow rate drops off because it's counter pressures within the tree. I see a hand. Yes.
Since the sap is stopped flowing just below the tap hole, is there an incentive to make that hole lower so you can check your sap? How do you
I think this thinking is so new to most maple producers because they're in the same boat I was for years. I have no idea why it's running. So we've been teaching this now for about 5 years, and it's the first time a lot of people have ever heard it. So there is some thinking that I don't want to be tapping way up here, that I need to bring it down a little bit. Is it going to make a huge difference? It's just the sapwood. So you're talking a few cups of sap maybe by changing from here to here? Well, that's the issue you run into. You might compromise not having the flow to get things out, or you might put yourself so low that ice and snow and squirrels and mice and everything else start to become your issue. So we always work at a convenient, I'd say work at a convenient height. Besides, tapping up here, as some of you know, has its treacheries. It's a little bit hard to hold on to things up there. Anyway, when do we tap? Generally, we're looking for the time of year where we're getting freezes and thaws. A lot of larger operations would simply set a calendar date, and then you get a year like this and you start to question your calendar date. Our calendar date at the RNOT has typically been the 15th of February, and we started soon after the first issue, just because the weather looked like it was going to be a factor that we couldn't control. A lot of smaller producers, 500 tap or less producers, they can tap in a day or a day and a half, and they would look at a 5-day forecast. But I would also say that many times, even looking at the 5-day forecast is very disappointing. Because a lot of times your trees are frozen or the conditions aren't right really early, and you'll go out and tap, and you just don't get much out of it. Right, Pete? We were all excited about tapping, and now we've had some cold weather plus a little bit of warm-ups, and we really haven't gotten much out of the deal here the last few days. It's only been in the mid to 30s, and it's just not quite ready to go. So this whole thing of tapping, you all had some experience with that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but there's a number of different devices you can use, and we talked out there how you slightly tip that uphill into the tree. A lot of people would tap between 1.5 and 2.5 inches deep, and we have the standard spouts, which you didn't see much of when you were out there, but they're 7/16. The health spout, which we use at the R-Knot, is a 5/16, and that hole, even though that doesn't sound like a very big difference, that's almost smaller than half. I'd have to actually do the calculation, but it's half the size, and it causes half the damage in the tree when you are using the smaller spout. If you use the smaller spout and you don't have vacuum, you'll lose about 20% of your production. If, on the other hand, the smaller spout outproduces the larger spout under vacuum conditions, which is totally contrary to what you might think, but that is a researched fact that we keep running into. And you want to use a convenient height, and then we want to drive that spout into the tree. Then this is for comparison of size. This is your house spout, and that is the traditional 7/16 size spout. Now this is kind of an interesting picture with several problems involved. You tell me, what do you see for problems there? This is the typical spout that would hold a bucket on a tree. Sometimes we have to drive those just a little bit harder because they've got all that weight to hold. Tapped right above another hole. The chances that that totally has missed that compartmentalization or some effect from it is pretty small. It's going to have some effect, yeah.
That tap looks like it's straight in.
Straight in. We can live with straight in, though we prefer it to be slightly tipped. Anybody want to take that 20-ouncer out there and whack away? That's a huge hammer, and it's kind of interesting that they use that, because a lot of times if you hit those files too hard, you can actually split the bark. Then it leaks sap, and it also lets microorganisms in, and it is not a positive thing at all. In fact, this hole will take a number of years to heal compared to just a hole that has not split. And that happens when you can use too big a hammer, you can use too much of a swing, but if you're tapping when it's really cold, your chances of splitting goes way up. So how many taps are we going to put in a tree? A few years ago, the R-Knot, following some advice from Center Acer, which is the research facility in Quebec, decided to go to 1 tap per tree. And then last year, Center Proctor, which is the Vermont Research Center, came out with their research that showed that once you get above 18 inches, you do gain about 1/3 or more sap out of that second tap on those trees. So, when producers ask me about that, I ask them, do you want sap production or do you want bragging rights? Because bragging rights go a long ways. If you put just 1 spout in a tree and you do get, so you don't have that second more inferior spout, your bragging rights go up, way up. What do I mean by bragging rights? Your syrup per tap. Everybody wants to compare syrup per tap. And if you don't have anything near the top, then your bragging rights are no good. So the guideline that's been typical in recent years is when we get to 10 to 17 inches, we're putting 1 tap in that tree. When we're 18 to 24, we're putting 2. When we're bigger than that, we'll put 3. And I would say this is a pretty good general rule, but it really needs to be based on the health and growth of the trees. If the trees are not growing very fast, this might have to be, you might have to tap not quite this heavy. This is what we see inside the tree. And I did bring some of my things with me today to show this, but we have the hole. The hole is always there. It'll heal over the face of that hole, but the hole is always present. And then this compartmentalization area, where the tree basically fills that with polyphenols. to stop flow and to stop any further action of bacteria and yeast. And it's an area that's brown and it never flows sap again. So we want to avoid ever tapping into that part of the tree. And if we do, of course, this will still run sap because you've got some good wood on the front end of that tap, but your back end, there's nothing going to come into this tap hole from where it's in that partition zone. And the partitioning, a lot of times, we'll put some yellow color into the sap once you get halfway through the season or so, and it really is quite disgusting. It looks like urine coming out of the tree, and that's not usually what we want to make into our syrup. So if we take a tree and we're going to pattern tap it like you saw us doing out at the yard, not with those paints on the tree. Actually, part of the area didn't have paint because it hadn't been tapped in a long time. And we're starting with a 12-inch tree, so we're pretty good. But if this tree is growing too slow, you can see that over time, we've got to catch up. If the tree is growing too slow, we reach a point where, it just keeps moving forward. Well, we just jumped over a whole bunch of slides and I don't know how to make it. Hey. How do I get it to go back? Any idea? I need to jog really fast. I shouldn't punch that button 1,000 times because I was hitting the back up. Does page up move me back? No. Okay. Sorry about that. Still moving forward. That was one you've seen? All right. Anybody remember what I was talking about? Slow growth of the tree, right. We don't want to get around that tree and find that there's no place that we can go to get nice clean wood. So, this is pretty much back to where we were. A lot of times on the outside of the tree, you cannot see damage that's underneath the bark. And so, in the prior picture, I guess I better back up just a little bit more. If we were to drill a hole where we have some damage in the tree, what we get is shavings that are very dark and ugly. And when we find that in a hole, we would generally reject that hole and go and put it in another spot on that tree so that we get some nice clean wood. Now if we were to pick a nice spot on that tree, like we have here, by luck actually, then we get nice clean, creamy shavings. And so we strongly encourage maple producers as you're tapping to pay attention to the chips you're taking out of the tree, because it's the only clue you have about what's going on inside that tree and whether you'll get a good quality tap out of it or not. So there's our ugly shavings, here's our nice shavings, and that's just one of the things we strongly encourage maple producers to do. Dark shavings always give us yellow sap partway through the season. That yellow sap is bound to put some off flavors in our syrup, which we don't want to try to pass on to our consumer. The other thing we find with some trees when we do some cookie cutting in them is that some people are very exact with their convenient height. They'll drill exactly the same place. And what you do is you create actually a weakness in the tree where you've got all those holes drilled at exactly the same place. And the other thing is, as we pointed out, as we get away from the tap hole, the coloration, the compartmentalization actually walks away from the surface of the tree. So if you move up and down, your risk of hitting that partition goes down. So our suggestion would be that you would pattern tap. And if you're a new producer on trees that don't have a lot of old taps, it's a nice, easy thing to do. If you are working with trees like we have at the Arnott, where there's a lot of old taps, then it becomes very difficult because you can do turn a row and then you've got to skip over 6 inches because there's no clear space, and then you tap a couple more and then you've got to move over, and it becomes very hard to follow, and that's why we've gone to painting the spots so we can find and follow the progress on those old trees. Now here's an example of someone who's doing a pattern tap, but what's his problem?
It's
too far, it's too wide. In about 9 years, he's going to be right back around this tree. These spots that you can see now probably won't be visible anymore, and we'll be back to the old hit or miss. And we like to have producers who's always hit clean white wood. How sweet the sap. This is a hydrometer that we use to measure the sweetness in sap, and it's just a flotation device, and you can see that one is floating at about 3.6. But sugar contents typically are around somewhere between 1 and 5%. Cornell has done a fair amount of research in the past on developing the sweet trees, which are trees that come out of orchards that have been selected for their sweetness, and hopefully they're going to be sweeter than others. Or you can test it with a refractometer, where you just put a few drops of sap on, take a look through the meter, and there you can see where that crosses the scale is the reading, 4.5. This is some nice big trees over in my home county, Wyoming County, at the 4-H camp. If anybody's ever been over that way, nobody's tapping them. 4.5 sugar, beautiful 30-inch trees, and all that sweetness goes to waste. Now, how important is the sweetness of your sap, especially the small producers who may not have reverse osmosis or something? If you are getting 1% sap, you have to boil away about 86 gallons of water to get 1 gallon of syrup. And if you can get that up to 2%, we're down to 43 gallons, which is still a significant load of boil. And if we can get that all the way up to 4%, we're down to like 21 gallons of sap that have to be boiled away to get 1 gallon of syrup. So that's pretty important, particularly the backyarders and small producers with the equipment that doesn't necessarily go very fast. When we collect sap, generally we want to deal with it daily. There's none of this waiting for the weekend for boiling. And then we want to exclude the rain and tree drip. We want to use food quality containers. We want to clean up between runs. We want to dump that yellow sap, and we want to filter sap. So this is kind of the original method of gathering sap. What is that? That's either leather or birch bark that Indians would have used to gather their sap. And they would do it by hacking a tree and then directing that sap out with some sort of stick to put it into the collector. Now we've moved up to the bucket with a steel spout, and then we want to also put a cover on there. The cover doesn't solve everything, but it keeps the snow and the rain out anyway. It doesn't keep squirrels, mice, earthworms, and all kinds of other pieces of nature that like to find that nice sweet sap as well. Using food quality containers is something we are always pushing on people. What do you think of the collection point there? Is that exciting to see a barrel of unknown origin being filled with sap to later be turned into syrup? We really encourage producers all the time to be very careful about what image you show to the public, even to the point of using something like galvanized garbage pails or the Rubbermaid type pails. Those are not food grade, and we encourage people away from that. And in fact, this is a picture from Ohio. Fortunately, it's not taken in New York. And these are the buckets ready to go out on the trees. Is there a problem, actual physical problem with this? Chances are pretty good that these actually say HDPE on the bottom, high density polyethylene, and that would make them food grade. But what have we done to our image?
At least paint them.
Paint, do something, right? One of the ways of collecting sap is the sap bags. We don't see this in New York a lot, but some other parts of the country, they're very popular. They use them a lot in Wisconsin. They're fairly good in that they replace the bag each year, so they're not dealing with old fermented materials. A lot of people would use the 5-gallon bucket actually to gather sap by putting a little tubing and drop it to the ground. This has the advantage of you can put a hole in that lid that just lets the tubing in, and then you don't get the flies, you don't get the moths, you don't get the mice. None of those things come and bother your sap. So that's an idea that works pretty good. He's gone so far here as to put a little box on the bottom, and he does that because if you empty those buckets and then you get a windy day, they don't stick around. So he's made that kind of a adjustment. The main thing that sap is gathered in though now these days is suspended tubing. There are still some large bucket operations around. Lewis County in particular has several 5,000 bucket operations up there that, well, I did 1,200 buckets for 10 years, and it's a workout. And having 5,000 of them out there just seems mind-boggling. Yeah,
How long has the tubing process been in practice, or when was that first
they started to work on that in the 50s.
Okay.
So it's been around quite a long time, and it's made there's been a lot of changes to the point now where we have a pretty much a food grade plastic that's being used in the industry. A lot of times people wonder how it is you suspend that tubing and it stays up, or don't deer bother it, or doesn't other wildlife bother it. This is one of my research plots. And the way we keep it suspended like that, as you saw, is you wrap around your end tree, and small producers would wrap 2 end trees and put it tight between the 2. And it stays suspended pretty good. Deer rarely bother it unless they're being chased by dogs or something. Moose, on the other hand, will walk through a tubing system and gradually build up tubing around their neck and over their shoulders until they cannot move anymore. Then they'll back out of it and head on down. So a producer will go out in the woods, and there's this tubing on this big wad. And I find that hard to understand, because you try to walk against tubing as a human, and it wins a lot of the time. But this moose can just sort of keep on going. So as you saw in the woods, we have different aspects of this. We have the drop lines, we have the spouts. We usually want to have those drop lines so we can reach all the way around the tree. And as you saw, different trees are different sizes, so it's a little bit hard to do that. And then when we put these tees in, we want to not put it right next to the tree. That's a hard place to work with. Just getting the tools in there and trying to work with it. So we just put those a little bit away from the tree. You got to see this out there firsthand. There's your main line. It's held up by a wire. We already talked about plastic in the woods while we were there, but there's the wire, and then we strap the wire to the tubing with these little wire ties. And the way we put that tubing up in the woods, we didn't get a chance to do this because it had already been finished in the section we were working, but we put that wire through there fairly loose, and then we would side tie it to the trees and give it its tension. We want it to be very tense, but by side tying it, now we can drop a tree on it, we can have a limb fall on it. It just drops down, and you go in and take the wood off, and it'll pop back up in most occasions. Now this year, we did have one wire break at the R-knot. That's the first in a while, I think, since we've gone to side ties, where the wire actually would break. And a side tie is very simple. You have a heavy gauge wire holding up your tubing, you have a lighter gauge wire hooked to an anchor tree, and then you protect that tree with tubing or hose or something so that it doesn't cut into that tree. And then we hook those lateral lines, as we got a chance to do, onto that main line. Typically we want to keep those lateral lines 150 feet or less, depending on how dense the woods is. The more dense woods, of course, it's easier. And then we're putting 5 to 6 taps on each of those lateral lines so that we can get vacuum out to the trees. And then we're hooking our wires through some sort of an anchor, not wrapping them around the tree, sticking a few branches in there to keep it away from the tree. Those branches deteriorate in about 10 years, and then your wire is embedded in the tree. What you saw at the R-knot was basically a tree-style installation. You bring lateral lines off both sides of your main lines. This works really well in the woods that has deep gullies, but the system we encourage people to use is the contour system, where your main lines set on a contour. They're a constant drop of about 2 to 6%, unless you have a really steep woods. And then all your lines come off of just one side. And what this does is it creates a way that you can very quickly walk and inspect your lines. This takes a lot of walking and stepping over and ducking under, and slows you down immensely. This you could actually go out there on a 4-wheeler if you set your woods up right and do a fairly fast inspection. And this is what it looks like out in the woods. You can see you're free to just walk right down that line and check for leaks very quickly by holding down those little loops to see if air is shooting through there or if they're just slowly passing sap. And we got a chance to see the two. This is how the end trees are hooked. We put a loop around the tree and then hook our drop line to it. In this case, we've used 2 tees to accomplish that. We consider that kind of an old-fashioned problematic way to go, whereas there's some special fittings. So we can put the wrap around the tree can be old tubing, and the sap never goes there. Anytime sap is sitting someplace, it tends to ferment and degrade. So we want it all to go right down the hill as fast and as quick as possible. I'm sure you had a chance to experience it. We'd have tapped this tree at about this spot so that we could get that extra sap I just told you about hanging in the tree there. Our biggest problem then becomes our line definitely wants to loop down below, creates this little spot that won't drain, and creates a spot for fermentation to happen. And then when we get to the end, we're putting it into the saddles. I don't know if you had a chance to see those very closely, but it's just a piece that's connected to the top of the main line, and then we hook this special hook into the wire so that it takes the pressure off of our saddle, because saddles are kind of sensitive to being a lot of side pressure. A lot of different tools. A lot of you had a chance to work with those a little bit. Without the tools, it's really tough. And one of my favorite tools is a spooler. Without the spooler, we should have demonstrated for you out there how fun it is to do that without the spooler, because if you just pull the line out of the roll, it will kink many times for you, and that's very annoying. Without the vacuum systems, a lot of small producers would just gather sap into jugs like this. These are 15-gallon high-density polyethylene jugs. They're very durable, work real nice out there. And as I mentioned before, we've done a fair amount of research with this issue of the fact that the tree pulls sap back in out of your contaminated lines and pollutes the hole, dries up your hole fairly quickly. So we've done, if you're out there, you probably saw some of these canisters lined up out through the woods. That's where we do what we call our tap hole sanitation research. And that's set up so that there's 2 canisters and 2 lateral lines and 2 spouts in a tree. And what we do is we do 2 different treatments to compare them with each other. And the reason we do this on single trees is because if you tap one woods one way and another woods another, you have all these factors that are hard to separate. One set has bigger trees, or it has poorer soils, or it has a better crown ratio, or any of those kind of things enter into the sap. So if we can find a way that we can do side-by-side tests like this, we find that we get really very consistent results. Now, everybody who's ever tapped with buckets knows that 2 taps don't always run on the same tree. And usually that's based on orientation. The buckets on the south side of the tree always run better than the buckets on the north side of the tree, because the heat gets there sooner, warms things up, gets that side of the tree running. So we try to keep our orientation in the same basic direction. And what we have found, well, here's the kind of example. When I came to the Arnott Forest, this is what most of the taps and drop lines look like. The drop lines were made of old lateral lines. And one of the concerns I had was, being somewhat of a trained plant pathologist, is there's sap in here that you know is contaminated. Can those bacteria and yeast swim backwards into the hole and contaminate it? Well, I found out they don't even have to swim backwards. The tree actually accomplishes that for us by sucking backwards. So we'll compare a new spout and drop with the old, for instance. And what we see in this case is, out of the new spout and drop, we got 26 gallons of sap per tap. And we got about 11 out of the old one. So do you think that's a significant difference to a maple producer? Out of this, he can make a half a gallon of syrup. Out of this, he's going to make about a quart. That's a difference of somewhere between $15 and $20 in gross return per tap for simply doing a $2 swap out. Now, when you tell a maple producer with 5,000 taps, you need to go out and replace all your spouts and drops, and it's only going to cost you $2 per spout, and he says, what's that going to cost me? $10,000? Are you kidding me? I'm not going to spend $10,000 on your say-so. So it has to be proven. They have to try a little bit at a time, and there's a lot of those changes that are now being made. So 120% more sap at 2.2 times, or 14.1 more gallons of sap per tap with the new versus the old. And there's this other spout that that was developed actually by Senator Proctor. They announced that they had this patented the same year that we tried check valves from a different source in spouts and got a good set of results. So they were about a year ahead of us, and they got the patent, so they get all the money. But there's just a little ball in there that lets it block that backflow of sap. And in our research, we have found that the new spout and drop actually always out-yields the check valve, but the amount of work and cost of putting a check valve on is much less. So here we have 101% more, 2 times more sap, or 10.2 more gallons per spout, per tap, where you'd use a check valve on a very old drop. And if you throw all three of them together, here's our new spout and drop, here's our check valve on an old ugly drop, and here is the average for the old spout and drop. We also have done research with silver spouts. That's an idea that comes out of the medical industry. It has ionic embedded silver inside that plastic. And when bacteria and yeast pass by it, it disrupts their cell membranes and kills them, if it goes through slow enough. And maple usually is slow. What we did is we found that increases is about 67% the first year we tried it. And then we used that same spout the second year, and in the second year that spout gave us 72% more sap. So in other words, it was very effective for 2 years. We'll be trying it for 3 years this year. And this is again how it would line up: a new spout and drop, a silver spout, and our old spouts and drops. A lot of people ask if I go into all the effort to change my spouts and drops, which is a major effort, how long will that last? And what we found is if we compare a second year spout with an old spout and drop, the difference is nowhere near what it is in the first year. The second year, the contamination is there, and it gives you some benefit that second and third year, but nowhere near what replacing it would be. 31% more instead of 120% more. So if you would look again on all three, here's my new spout and drop, here's my second year, here's my old ones. So it's much closer to the old ones than it is to a new one. And that makes sense biologically too. We did some big field trials with this where we replaced 2,700 taps out on one of the farms over in Otsego County. Any Otsego County people? And because we wanted to see just how this worked out in a field setting other than our small tests. And on these 2,700 taps, he gained 2.2 times more sap than he did the year before, 2.4 times more than all of the neighboring woods around it. And on average, we had 22 gallons where we changed the spout and drop, 10.5 in the rest of his 13,000 tap operation. So he was angry after we did the test. What do you suppose he was angry about? He said, if we had just switched the whole woods, I would have taken in $60-some thousand more in syrup this year. So now he's a check valve guy. He's got it all set for check valves. So field demonstrations, if you get into extension or any of those kind of things, field demonstrations carry much more weight than your word. And then as part of this, we did a labor study and found that labor plus parts on replacing a spout and drop was about $2.17. We also do those tests on gravity. That's what that last picture was. I ain't touching anything. It just shows gathering in the tanks, not into the canisters. And if we do the same tests on gravity, we get about the same differences with check spouts, with new spouts and drops, with silver spouts. It relates both the vacuum and it does. Because some of the people are saying, if we put high enough vacuum out there, we think we can overcome it. If we leave it on 24/7 through the maple season, we can overcome it. And in our experience, neither of those are true. It works the same. 133%, 2.4 times more. But then when we're on gravity, we aren't getting the big yield. It's only 6 gallons more of sap. Now let's just do a quick comparison. 70% of the systems in New York, as of 2004, did not have vacuum. Now that's not 70% of the spouts out there, but 70% of the systems when they surveyed producers. So what are they missing? On average, where I have a new spout and a new drop, both on gravity and on vacuum, my vacuum spouts were yielding me 26 gallons of sap per tap, and my non-vacuum taps were giving me 10. Everything was new in both cases. So, that would be, push that one. That would be a 151% increase, simply to 16 inches of vacuum on those lines, or 2.5 times, or 15.6, almost a half a gallon more of syrup coming out of where vacuum is or not. So can based on that I'm getting $20 more worth of syrup out of every spout in my woods. Can I afford to put vacuum in? The real question is, can I afford not to put vacuum in? And one of the things I'm working on is how small producers can get into vacuum. Same sort of thing with old spouts and drops. Of course, it drops way down, but where we had old spouts and drops, vacuum gave us 10 gallons versus a little less than 5 on gravity. And what I have, if anybody's interested in it, we have a spreadsheet that we show producers. And it sets in some basic rules of thumb. You increase 5% SAP for every inch of vacuum you increase. Your vacuum pump loses a certain amount of its capacity as it gets higher vacuum. So you have to pay more for vacuum as you run the vacuum higher. And just the different cost things in there. You put in there what you normally run when you're not on vacuum, and it'll tell you what you would get if you put vacuum in at different levels. So it's very easy to see the financial return. And I'm not going to do that right now, but that's something that's available from Cornell. We try to put together helpful spreadsheets. It's interesting how many farmers actually use spreadsheets, but there's a number of them out there that are very into it. This is a releaser. I opened the door and said there's a releaser when we were out there the other day. I noticed no one went in to actually examine it firsthand, but it's what separates the vacuum from the liquid. At some point we have to separate them so we can put the liquid in the tank. And what happens is the lines come into this releaser, the syrup runs down into the bottom, the vacuum is on the top, and a pump continually removes the sap as it fills that up. And that's as simple as it is to separate the two. And they are also those what we would call mechanical releasers that don't have to have electricity to operate. One of the things we run into with maple tubing is this issue of edge resistance. When you're trying to force air through a tube, there's friction. And when you're trying to estimate how big my tubing needs to be, how much vacuum pump I need, how to get that vacuum to extend all the way to my tap, because I can have a great vacuum at my pump, but if I don't have vacuum at the tap, it doesn't do anything for me except increase my electric bill and my capital costs. So we've done a lot of research on this very thing, and that is, what is the natural leak rate out there? If we took care of all the leaks that we can find, there's still a natural leak rate. It's coming from the tree, it comes around the spouts, it comes through the tubing to some degree, through little connectors and so on. So we went out with our gauge and vacuum and we tested a whole bunch of lateral lines to figure out what is the natural leak rate? How much air do I have to be removing from this system with vacuum on a regular basis? And it's kind of a variety. At the E line, our average was 1 cubic foot of air per minute has to be removed for every 100 taps we have out there. And at the R naught, our reading was 0.7 cubic feet of air per minute that has to be removed from those lines in order to maintain vacuum. Now, we noticed fairly quickly at the E line that there were sections that were actually at 3 cubic feet per minute per 100 taps. And we were when we talked to the people who work up there, Mike Farrell, I don't know if you'll get a chance to meet him, but we found out that one person was the one who tapped all the lines with a high leak rate. And so this might come back to you guys when we go and check your taps out here in the middle of the season. Those who did not, this person was not driving his spouts hard enough into the tree, and they were leaking at 3 times the rate of the rest. And if a person did his whole woods that way, that would mean he'd need 3 vacuum pumps to accomplish what he should have been able to accomplish with 1. And 3 times the size of tubing. So making sure everything is sealed up good with the tapping was fairly important. And this gives us a basis by which to design systems. One of the things we run into is we have to get sap from the tree and we have to get air from the tree. And so what we want our lines to look like is we want sap running on the bottom and we want air running on the top. They're both going in the same direction, and we have to have enough bubbles. And we get no real vacuum in the woods when that's the situation. Or it's coming through as plugs. And usually what's happened with the plugs is somewhere out there our lines were coming at one slope and then they changed to a different slope. And that causes that sap to back roll or form a little lake, so to speak. And it blocks our movement of air and destroys our power of vacuum. So changing slope is a huge issue. Do you think we changed slope at the R naught? we have these big steep hills. Our sap lines are coming down off those hills, and then they hit the area where the sugar house is, and they flatten out for that last 100 feet. Are we getting a lot of plug flow? We sure are. Can we beat that? We have to put in what we call a dry line. A line that carries nothing but air that goes over top of that sap carrying line until we get to where the slope is, and then we can get all of our vacuum past the lake, past the ponding, past the backflow. One of the things that's available, and this is what we base a lot of our background information on, is called an air loss, line loss chart. So what I have in this chart is this is how many feet away you are from the vacuum pump. This, 1 inch, is the size of line that we're dealing with. And it's just here, this is continuation. And then this is the size of pumps that we have hooked on that line. A 15 cubic foot per minute pump, a twice as big 30 cubic foot per minute pump, a twice as big as that, a 60 CFM pump. And what you see here is how many cubic feet of air are still being moved at a distance away from that pump. And these help us learn a lot about things. For instance, my 15 CFM pump and my 100 CFM pump at a mere, 800 feet out my line deliver exactly the same amount of capacity. Why that be? Friction loss. You can only suck so much air through a line at a certain pace without a lot of friction. So this all enters into how we calculate out how big a system has to be based on how long it is, how much air it needs, and so on. In fact, what we have come up with is, I guess it's not going to show me my whole picture yet. Within that line, we can determine how much air we need to move through that line and how much sap we need to move through that line. And then we do calculations based on that. Let's see, where do I? Where we come up with a recommendations and guidance chart, and it just skipped over the guidance chart. Sorry about that. But what it is in our manual, there's a chart that says if you have so many cubic feet per minute available from your pump and you're so far away from that pump distance in the line and your line is a certain size, this is how many taps you can put on that line and have your line balance between how much airspace it needs and how much sap space it needs. That's all brand new recommendations which have become available in the last 2 years through Cornell research. And that's probably a good place to stop. The other thing that would be interesting for you if you're really into this is there is a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is online. It's an Excel spreadsheet which tells you how much it's going to cost to put in an acre or a tubing system. So you can actually put the data in. All you need for data is a density reading on your woods, which is very easy to do, and then how many taps you want on a lateral line, and it tells you exactly how many taps, or what those taps will cost, and how much that acre will cost. And it also tells you how many feet of main line you need, how many feet of lateral line you need, how many drops you need, how many around the tree wraps you need, how many T's, how many Y's, how many wire ties. It actually calculates all those things for a person who wants to do that installation. But it's most important is if you have to go to the bank and tell them, I want to do this. And they say, so what's it going to cost? And you say, well, I have no idea. How far do you think you're going to go with that loan? So that spreadsheet's very useful in new operations. Thank you.